welcome to again one of the amazing sessions uh, s- of, of FinTech OI, and this has been a monthly recurring sessions which we keep on hosting out here. So, in case if any one of you guys have not been receiving any updates or just got to know about our like monthly sessions, do reach out to us and we will add you to our like monthly newsletters and regular updates. So, with that being said, I just gave a brief background in terms of FinTech OI. So, we uh, want to set up a larger ecosystem around fintech in India, and how do we accelerate the whole ecosystem together? So how do we do it is majorly setting up multiple initiatives from a knowledge session series like this one to apart from that we set up a couple of B2B matchmaking sessions where recently in the month of August we hosted one of them where we had close to 100 plus meetings in a span of just 4 hours. And apart from that, there are a couple of other engagement sessions as well with multiple corporates and startups as well. So that's brief about what we do at FinTech OI. And with that being said, I won't waste much time and let me quickly dive into the topic here. So again, when we talk about money as a whole concept, so money conveys a lot of importance to the people in their life, and it serves as a medium of exchange. And the earliest form of money which we can track was somewhere around 600 BC in the region of Western Turkey, where the where the coins were first minted. And since then, we have come a long way, where in the late 1800s, where 30 plus banks started issuing notes independently in the world. And at that point of time, like during the 1900 crisis, the political wisdom so which took over the world, and we centralized the whole ecosystem of money, and that's where the whole that gave the birth to the central banks as we know today. So with that being said, we have been debating so much about central banks and the concept of digital money as well. And with that, I would like to welcome all our panelists out here. Mrs. Sharat Chandra, who is the blockchain and emerging tech evangelist. Mr. Kashinath, who is managing director at Monetago. Mr. Pravas De, who is a disruptor in chief at US India Blockchain Council. And Mr. Anirudh Rastogi, who is founder and managing director at Ikigai Law. Welcome, everyone.
Hi.
Thank you, sir.
Great. So with that, let me dive a bit detail. So all of you guys have been associated with the whole blockchain and digital currency ecosystem in one format or the other. So I would request all of you to give a brief background in terms of what work you guys do, starting with you, Mr. Sharat.
Thanks, Sumit. Pleasure to be here, and good evening to all my fellow panelists today. Uh, I work closely with not-for-profits, and currently I am leading the blockchain working group of IIT India, Institution of Engineering and Technology. It's one of the oldest not-for-profits in the world. And this year we celebrated the 150th year, 150. So it's presumably one of the oldest think tanks in the world. And prior to IIT India, I was with Government Blockchain Association, and again, international not-for-profit organization. And I was leading the India chapter, and I was also part of the group which joined the METI's Blockchain Center of Excellence at STPI Gurgaon. So in Gurgaon, we have a Blockchain Center of Excellence called APRE, and GBA happens to be one of the partners there. So that was my previous instance. And currently, I'm also helping a couple of blockchain and fintech startups, advising and mentoring them. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Welcome. And over to you, Mr. Kashinath.
Yeah, hi, thanks. Good evening, everyone. My name is Kashinath Katagam, Managing Director at Monetago India. Monetago is primarily involved into blockchain solutions, and we have launched India's first and in fact world's first private permission blockchain solution to prevent duplicate financing of the invoices. This solution is operational since March 2018. It's more than 3.5 years being used on daily basis by all the trade exchanges in India, including NBFCs, fintechs, as well as banks coming through the Swift India channel. My background a little bit so I was part of the founding team at National Stock Exchange when NSE was being set up. And after that, I worked in US for almost like a decade with all the Wall Street banks. And I was involved with the Citibank during the financial crisis as part of their treasury reporting, liquidity reporting, part of that particular team. Came back to India, set up India's first trades exchange, which is a RXL, joint venture of NSE, Yes Bank, ICICI Bank, and SBI. And after that, I'm part of the Monodego team.
That's amazing. Welcome to the team. Over to you, Mr. Pravash.
Hi, Sumit. Thank you. Great meeting all of you here. So myself, Pravash De, I am Disruptor Chief, US India Blockchain Council. We started US India Blockchain Council in 2018. Before that, I was in the UK. I did my higher studies. I was also working in corporates. So I've been part of the Silicon Valley, Silicon Roundabout, and also Silicon Corridor ecosystem from 2007. Particularly in my personal capacity, I got involved into blockchain as well as the crypto space from 2010. It was very much personal investments to look at how exactly the cryptocurrency and blockchain works, how we can actually adopt the new technology and build products. So then after, I think since 2014, I've been very much active within the ecosystem, build products so that they can, engineers, they can also track, so they can say wherever building smart solutions. It runs twice in the editions with various investors to the second product. Third product, we just recently launching it. It's purpose of around 100 USD blockchain. So all we know at time. So pretty much we all were looking for.
Mr. Pravash.
Thank you so much. Hello everyone. I'm the founder and managing partner at Ikigai Law. We are a specialist law firm that largely focuses on representing technology businesses, particularly better known for our work in emerging nascent technologies that typically are regulated very ambiguously, and blockchain and cryptocurrency is a case in point. Been quite entrenched in this industry for the last 5-6 years. We set up the first set of exchanges in the country, Coinex. That was the first multi-currency exchange that introduced coins beyond Bitcoin for trade, and it was also the first order book matching system was set up and structured by us. We were the councils. In the early days of 2017, a bunch of exchanges got set up and saw the upward cycle that we had never seen before, which brought with it its own set of exciting legal work. You were launching new products. You were you had all kinds of consumer disputes. You had regulatory scrutiny. You had the income tax department and the ED waking up for the first time to what this devil is really, right? And so that kind of presented a whole host of legal and public policy challenges that we were part of. Then came 2018 April, of course, the RBI banned banking access for cryptos. We structured the first set of peer-to-peer exchanges that could exist then despite no access to banking. We also represented the exchanges before the Supreme Court that eventually after 2 years led to a reversal of the ban. Besides the crypto exchange business, we've also been involved with the first set of ICOs. So ZEBI, we were the councils. We worked on the Matic, now Polygon, the Matic IEO. Also been quite active in global projects, set up Qum, which was a Bahrain registered, the first Bahrain registered exchange. Been running a number of government-facing campaigns for the industry as well, trying to advocate and maybe bring some sense into the chaos that exists today in the industry. So yeah, that's a little bit of a brief. Very, very happy and honored to be here.
That's really amazing, and that's quite a diverse panel. So before I dive deep into a few set of questions, just a bit of a housekeeping things. If any of the attendees has any questions, just put it down in the chat window below, and do put down to which of the panelists you would like to direct your questions, and we will try to take as many as possible towards the end. So with that, I would like to dive with the first specific question. And when we talk about CBDC, that's a digital currency, it's practically not a cryptocurrency as we know it. So I would like to ask Mr. Kashinath that if you would have to explain CBDC or a digital currency to a 5-year-old kid, how would you explain to in the simplest possible terms? And why do you think that blockchain for CBDC is the best option out here?
Yeah, so CBDC, as we say, it's a central bank digital currency. It's a legal tender issued by the central bank, just like in a digital form. It is similar to the fiat currency, except that the form in which it is being issued is different. It's in the digital form. If you look at it, it will appear as a liability on the books of central bank, and And primarily, the way it is different from the other wallets or digital currencies is that it will be issued on a distributed ledger or a blockchain underlying as the technology. And that is the primary difference. One more thing is like, that most of the central bank digital currencies which are being issued will be at par with the fiat currency in that respective country. So there is a 1:1 correlation between the fiat currency and the CBDC. It is a virtual currency, but it is not a private virtual currency. When I say it is a virtual currency, it is issued in the digital form. It's issued on the underlying technology, which is the blockchain, but it is issued by the central bank. And that is why it is not a private virtual currency, just like Bitcoins or other coins which are being issued by other entities.
That's quite a very amazing description which you gave in. And when we talk about like major developments in various markets, there are close to 81 plus countries who are trying to set up the current like digital currencies in one format or the other. So I would like to ask Mr. Prawash if you could give us a global overview, global perspective in terms of what's the developments in different countries in various other economies that would give us a brief overall landscape out here.
Yeah, definitely. So if you talk about the global ecosystem, we already, as you said, there are only 81 countries who have been participating in this thing. But we have to understand the very nature of CBDC. Why do we need to bring in and where exactly the collaboration can happen? I frequently talk to Sanat, who is actually heading the CBDC in Thailand, and they have actually developed the infrastructure. They have already developed the technology behind it, and it's more like a public-private collaboration they have already started. There are a lot of banks who are participating in the whole ecosystem. Pretty much bringing in enterprises and rolling it out for the market itself. At the same way, if you look at the UAE ecosystem, also the UAE government is coming up with their own digital currency. They are designing it. They right now working pretty much within the government ecosystem for the payments and all these things. But very soon they will be making that open for the market as well. And there are a lot of developments already happening in that space. So all these things are already there. If you talk about India, we already kind of created a sandbox, and we have been working in that, looking at that black hole, and we see like how particularly in such an economy, the regulation part can play a role and bring the policies to the forum, get it passed in the government, both in parliaments, and then after take it and work within the ecosystem in terms of enterprise as well as then after conducting transactions. So these are the things already happening. I think there are some legal and regulatory aspects in the world still stopping it, but looking at the currency point of view, as it's very much, Kasinath sir was saying, it's very much needed and to build that infrastructure so that we can roll it out across the world or even India per se. But yeah, there are some stimulus checks happening. If you look at the US ecosystem, I think there are many transactions which have been tracked and they've been regulated as well. So I think, yeah, the world is moving towards a positive direction, but at the same time, there are many public policy makers who are actually trying to put some level of government, stop.
Right, like system, like and a lot of policy motivation about policy out here, and policy motivating to the. And do you think developments in the country?
Should the policy motivations be? I think obviously that was very on the question that has bothered me for a long time is what is time to really talk going on for a long time. And it is important to understand that because the motivations, vacations, right? I mean, it built in or that we assume when building out the CBDC. I think for the longest time in the early kind of stages of this CBDC, it seemed to me to be a lack of understanding of how to regulate what the government was wanted to ban cryptocurrencies. The RBI was obviously had made its decision on this. The idea was that, well, if we are going to ban cryptocurrencies, but are not in step with the way. Let's start thinking. That was the initial motive, which kind of happened. there is an increase, not necessarily a response to, or are not really meant to fill the. There's a legitimate need for having CBDCs across the world. I think there's a survey that said that close to 80% central banks across the world are looking to introduce CBDCs. They are, of course, at varying stages of development, stages of conceptualization, but many central banks are pretty much suffering from a fear of missing out. Like if China is going down that direction, and I think that's in India's etc. This FOMO, the policy narrative in India, and one other key motivation.
Really interesting.
Is that central bank and them to strengthen those of the private virtual
That's
currencies,
really interesting. And I study done by the Bank of International Settlement, that report on the Chat20 report in detail. But I would like to move ahead a bit, and international of economics, monetary policies, four factors. So question to Mr. Sharad, across international trade, what could be the potential solutions to that?
India's part of it more affordable to be one other. So if you look at the project, when I say called project RBF Singapore, we have one simple CBDC currencies, different geographic experimentation currencies for cross developments. So what are they? They have announced a link. I think at least cross. Take this example. Is running on PCI or NIPL, MAS, or has already their existing engagements with merchants. So imagine a digital rupee, this counterparty risk, right? And bank balances, they need to be settled, right? So that counterparty risk will be taken out if we are using digital currencies, or let's say in our context, maybe a digital rupee running on UPI rails. And this will be one of the primary experimentation done by RBI. RBI has said that they will start CBDC experiments by December, right? And if I can draw some inspiration from RBI governor's speech, he has categorically stated that if you're using CBDC on UPI rails, that will take care of the counterparty risk. And to make our current payment system more robust and resilient, I think that should be the first reason to try digital rupee. And the way e-rupee will be adopted in days and months to come will also give us a segue or give us a hint how this model can be taken forward. If you look at e-rupee, it's already a form of pre-programmed money, right? In terms of a string of characters on your phone, and you don't need an internet connection, you don't need a bank, right? So there's no counterparty risk. It also solves the challenges of digital divide between India and Bharat, right? You can use e-rupee and access services. To begin with, it's restricted to vaccination, but it can be taken forward to, let's say, education of girl child, or even rolling out subsidies in areas where there's no internet connectivity, right? And I mean, as a country, we have always boasted about the JAM Trinity, right? But there are certain areas where even the banking correspondents have failed in certain cases. And I can quote one example of India Spend, where they said that out of 40 million Jan Dhan accounts, only 60% of those accounts were operational, right? So again, there's a last mile connectivity of accessing banking services, and that's where e-rupee or digital rupee can come handy.
That's really interesting, and especially when we talk about the whole overall larger motive for any of the central bank to implement a CBDC is largely in emerging economies. It's always financial inclusion, and when it comes to emerging markets like India, like such statistics always shows that financial inclusion is always going to be a key driver for RBI to drive this CBDC implementations. So moving ahead, I would like to take Mr. Kashinath's perspective. Specifically, when we talk about central banks, they are still wary on like the impact of CBDCs on the financial system and the banking system out here, and these concerns are quite valid out here. So as we expect RBI introducing the retail CBDC like very soon, with experiments coming in December, as early as December. And banks are always going to be like at a threat of disintermediation. So can you outline the impact of CBDC on two things? Number A, that's banking sector, and number B being the financial sector.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think we have been talking about, like, that with the launch of the blockchain and other technologies, distributed ledger technologies, there is always a threat of, like, de-intermediation. That is, we don't require the intermediaries to carry out the functions. Given this particular fact, I believe, like, it's not going to completely replace the intermediaries. Banks are going to, like, continue, and the financial services will continue. It's like, that it may not happen, like, today, but over the period of time, yes, there will be some level of disintermediation. But banks, if you look at it, they are also gearing towards, like, becoming more like a technology and providing banking as a service. So from that particular perspective, my personal belief is that banks and financial institutions will continue to play a very important role. In fact, they will be part of and parcel of the whichever country the CBDC gets launched, they will be part and parcel of that. The main objective of any government, as you rightly pointed out earlier, the question is that whenever the CBDC is being introduced, the financial inclusion goals are there, and there are many other goals that needs to be tied up. So if you look at the today, the banks, they collect the deposit from the retail investors or from the corporates and others, and use that particular deposits to lend to the corporates back to whether it is a personal loan or whether it is the corporate loans or loans to the MSMEs. So credit is made available by the banking sector to the for the growth of the economy. If you remove the banks completely from that particular picture, then who's going to do that, play that particular part? That question needs to be answered, right? So what I feel is that yes, over a period of time, disintermediation will happen, but it is not going to happen immediately. Any disruptive introduction of technology or any or even CBDC is not going to work. It will create a chaos. The economies might collapse, and it can have it would create a mayhem in the financial markets. So from that particular perspective, I believe the banks will continue to play and a very important role. In fact, what will happen is that the and that is my perception and my view is that the central banks will work with the banks in terms of introduction of the CBDC, whether it is account based. If you look at it, right, the demonetization happened few years back, 3-4 years back, and the objective was very clear, like push for digital transactions, and that is the primary objective. Financial inclusion and other things which are also very important, but also to bring down the cost of the issuance of currencies and the mutilated exchange of the notes, the mutilated notes and printing of the or minting of the coins. So definitely they want to bring down the cost, but that is replaced with the technology like a CBDC. So what I feel is that the functions the banks will continue to play. They will be part of that thing. RBI will not be able to, or even any central bank today don't have a direct access to the retail accounts. They use the intermediaries to open banks account, do the KYC and all those things. If you remove the banks completely from the picture, or even the financial sector completely from that particular picture, who's going to do that particular functions? There has to be somebody who will do the KYC, who will open the accounts, whether we call it a token based account, whether we call it account based account, doesn't matter what form. There'll be certain level of intermediation will happen, but the number of players who are doing the intermediary or the certain functions which they are doing it will get eliminated. What the government or the regulators, what they are trying to do is bring in more efficiency, bring down the or lower down the cost of transactions for the retail masses, and that should help and that is the primary objective. The government's objective is never to, or even the central government's or central bank's objective is not to remove the banks from the intermediation process.
Absolutely, that's quite a a key perspective which you shared. Because banks has always been at an operational side as well as technology side of distribution of money. So they have two functions beyond just being the banking partner to the retail ecosystem. So yeah, that's quite an interesting point which you put out. So with that being said, we always consider that there is always a mix of public banks as well as private banks. And when it comes about to financial sector, there is always a mix of public and private ecosystem players playing together in each and every financial service industry out here. And as and when we move ahead, there has been a lot of initial projects which has been launched with public-private partnerships. They are still in discussions. So I would like to take Mr. Anirudh's view around this. What exactly is the role of public-private partnerships in issuing these digital currencies? What are your thoughts in terms of the operational framework necessary for CBDC issuance? So I would like to bring in Mr. Pravas first to give your views on this.
Okay, so that I respect Kasinath sir's views on it, but I think there is a lot of technological revolution has already happened around the world. If you see the level of interaction happening in terms of real money, central bank issuing something, and then after the banks, then after there are a lot of private banks or public banks who have banking services as well as other services like insurance, like fixed deposit, like other things which has to be, and there is an end user who is general consumer, right? So when all these things comes in, there is a structural aspect of it which actually affects, because these banks are very large, and they have a very different structure of decision making. So just to take for that instance, leave like SBI or any particular bank and bring in some of the fintech companies or startups who are actually can bring in technology, and they can revolutionize the idea, provide a lot of services that is going to connect your central bank authorities as well as the end user. So we don't actually need the bank to come in between and play a mediatory role to opening the bank account and KYC. Anyway, we have already connected the Aadhaar card to our PAN card, and it is already connected to the bank. So anybody who is today have Aadhaar card in India, who has a phone number that is structurally or technologically they are connected, so you can have the KYC. Second thing is we need to understand what is the technology side of it. Today, if you talk about whether this is a real person or it is a robot, it is very much clear that when you actually go to a bank and you have twofold authentication, whether it's through the Aadhaar card or through your facial recognition or thumb recognition, so automatically we are connected. Okay, this is actually XYZ person with all these features, so he is eligible to have a bank account, provided he has the money and he can afford to do all these things. So that is where the banks were usually coming earlier. Now we can actually remove that, and we can directly connect to the bank. The central bank. Then after, obviously, the decentralized ecosystem that we are creating through blockchain. It could be cryptocurrency, it could be non-fungible token, it could be fiat currency. So you have different multiple sources of funds right now available, or currencies available, and that can directly connect it to the banks for the settlement. So say, for example, if I have a bank account with HDFC and I want to do a transfer to my UK account Lloyds, I can do that. It could be any form of currency through the technology, and the banks can do a settlement at the end. So that services can be fulfilled, and as an end user, I can get my satisfaction of the services that I need. So the current challenge is because you have multiple layers of authorities getting involved. So if as a business person or entrepreneur I want to do a transaction in multi countries, unfortunately I'm not able to do it because of these authorities. And the second thing is it takes a lot of time. So if I have to get like 5,000 products today from India to UK, until and unless the bank settlement's done and all the NOCs get passed, I cannot do it. So if you bring in CBDC, then it would be very much possible for me just to do it over a click, and all the KYC and everything approved, so things are done. The bank settlements can be done afterwards, whether you have internet or not, you can actually physically do that afterwards. So that's not a problem. That is where the technology or the blockchain can actually take care of, because you are talking about the smart contracts, you are talking about the connecting the whole financial technology ecosystem. So that's my perspective.
That's very interesting.
So Sumit, I just want to add,
Yes.
a little bit perspective here. Central banks have never been given the mandate to operate retail accounts. Okay, so wherever so that is one key thing we need to keep in mind, that who's going to where are the accounts going to be maintained, whether it is a bank, whether it is some form of intermediary will be required. That is what I said, initially it may not, it may happen that all the intermediaries are there. Over a period of time, disintermediation will happen, but the number of intermediate players will go down. And that is where, with the CBDC, with the blockchain technology, as you rightly pointed out, yes, the transfer of funds will happen instantaneously on a real-time basis. And one of the points I think even Sharath mentioned earlier, the challenges in the cross-border transaction is today, India is way ahead in terms of the payment innovation, right? We are one of the few countries in the world where we operate a 24/7 into 365 days, retail as well as the wholesale payment system. Nowhere in the world we have similar kind of things, right? So the real challenges come because of the today, because of the traditional technologies, is that the fund transfer gets affected only because the timing of the central banks over there or the banks over there, they are when we are transferring the funds, they are sleeping, or the banks are closed over there, or in some countries it's shut down because of the holidays and other thing. And that is where the technology will come into play, the CBDC or the blockchain, where instantaneous funds will get remitted and acknowledged, and transfers can happen further down the line without waiting for the country to open or the banks to open. The money will get transferred. So my point is yes, this intermediation will happen over a period of time, but when you launch the CBDC, at that point in time, you need to make sure the adoption of the CBDC is there. Once the adoption happens over a period of time, this intermediation will happen as part of the process to bring in the efficiency.
So that's
Can I add one point to Kashinath's?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that yesterday, Bank of Thailand released one of the findings where it said that the project in Thanon and Lion Rock, which they are running, they said that the project has revealed that 50% of remittance costs can be cut down using central bank digital currency. And this report came out just yesterday, where Bank of BIS Innovation Hub and both Bank of Thailand are working.
Yeah, the BIS Innovation. Yeah.
Right. So there's an established case of using CBDC in cross-border payments.
Yes.
I think once it's adopted in India, and there are a lot of technological, people who are actually early stage adoption, that will immediately happen because of CBDC. So I'll just take 1 minute to tell you a story. And to be very honest, I didn't have a bank account because I'm already living outside and being an NRI. There are so many document process that a bank has to go and get it settled and all these things. And to be very honest, last 3 months I've been going to all public banks. I don't want to take the name, and private banks, and they're not being able to open account. And to be very honest, I just connected to Jupiter. It's just a fintech company, and I already have a Aadhaar card. That's enough. I just sent it to them. Within few minutes, they actually approved my thing, and immediately I transferred money from my Paytm to their account. The account is active, and now I can do transactions within India wherever I travel. To be very honest, there are a lot of private entrepreneurs or startups who are making huge revolution in terms of financial technology. The only thing is the government or the policymakers need to actually give them a yes nod, saying, okay, you have already done that. You have this number of use cases. If there is any fraud happening or negative happening, definitely we need to stop that. And that is where the government need to step in, because we cannot actually take that risk and do that with the public. But if the things are actually working well in technology, I think the government should be in a positive side, and they should think, okay, this is a great innovation we are doing like UPI. So why not actually take this and move to the next level? So that will actually open doors for us for business side, in trade and investment, investor relation and all those things. And also it will help us to bring FDIs, FII, foreign institutional investors, even foreign portfolio investors to India, because there are a lot of crypto investors I know personally who are interested to invest in India. Just because of the regulation point of view or regulatory point of view, they are not able to do it. So if we can accept CBDC and we can open the market in that segment, you will find a lot of foreign investors who will come to India. This is a great move by the government, by the way, for the single window ecosystem right now. They just launched a week and a half before when Honorable Prime Minister visited to US. I think they should actually move this to the next level and connect all these dots, that is the private or fintech companies, and then give them a security kind of things from the government side and open it up. That's my
So Pravash, I think you brought up a very good point. It's not just about fintechs or the private or the public sector banks or institutions. The real issue is having a global digital ID, and that is what is required to push whichever country. If I'm a citizen of a particular country, if I do the KYC, then I should be able to open a bank account or any other account in any other country based on the KYC. So today that is a challenge, and that is where the world has to move towards. If we need to have a free flow of information as well as across the globe, and if we have to be digitally connected.
Yeah, I think Estonia has taken a big step towards that for opening the e-residency program. I think everybody who has a digital KYC or digital ID, they are open. I can stay in India, I can do my business in Estonia, Malta. So honestly, that gives me a lot of pleasure. There is no boundaries of restrictions anymore.
Right,
So,
but I can't. You can't use the Estonia KYC information to open a bank account in India. That is unfortunately true, and that is a reality. And that is where, like, we need to bridge that divide because of the inconsistency of the information that happens between different geographies and geopolitical locations.
true.
And
Very
if
true.
if I may, actually, I think the only means for governments to build out large scale, scalable, effective CBDC systems that are also interoperable with each other. I firmly believe that governments should keep out of building the infrastructure layer on which they are going to run the CBDC itself. It is, and of course, I can understand why this is somewhat controversial, and I'm not sure how much appetite there is within the government for doing something like this. But really, by the infrastructure layer, I mean that we should be adopting public blockchains to kind of build on top of. Because that ensures, and I mean, the currencies of the future will have a currency component, but it will also have a technology component, which the governments are not really best suited for. So, we are anyway. I mean, if we look at the last 2-3 years that central banks have been waking up to the idea of CBDCs, we are still at very, very early stages of conceptualization, and that's just one example of why governments are probably not best suited to do this end to end.
Yeah, just to add to here, Sumit, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to hijack the things, but here, I think from the government's perspective, the funds which are being transmitted from overseas to so they are looking from the anti-money laundering perspective, or the funds being misused for terrorist financing. So those are the key concerns of the government, from where they are trying to build in protection. And this is a national security issue, not only for India, but also globally for each and every country. What we are seeing is because of the technology, it is easier to pass on the information from one country to another, or easy to transfer the funds from one country to another, but it is also being misused. And that's where I think the government would like to come and put a layer, just like what they have done with the UPI or the NPCI, right? UPI has made access to funds for any person anywhere in India instantaneously. Within 2 seconds, you get the funds transferred from one part of the country to another part. Earlier, the checks would take 15 days, 20 days to transfer the funds. So what we have to look from the national security perspective, we have to look from the anti-money laundering perspective. We also need to look at the terrorist financing perspective from the government's point of view. It's always good to have yes, we always think from the perspective of technology as a disruptors, but we have to start thinking from the nation perspective, from the regulators perspective. What are they comfortable? If you try to build platforms which are comfortable, giving a comfort level to the regulators, then they are ready to adopt that technology. Yeah, over to you, Sumit.
Those pointers which you pointed out are quite an interesting and quite intriguing as well. And I think when it comes to digital currency or digital money as a concept, those days are far behind in our past, where drug lords used to stash money in their private planes and move across borders. I guess at this moment, tracing each and every penny is practically possible, just that one should have the right means, and governments are practically trying to do that in terms of regulating it. And then when it comes to digital onboarding solutions, I guess banks are never going to go out of business, just that the role of bank may evolve slowly from just a platform play to more of a tech fin play as well, where they are more of an intermediaries handling digital onboarding and operational side as well. So those are quite an interesting points. And then as I move ahead with a couple of few last set of questions which I have, I would like to ask Mr. Anirudh that should India build the CBDCs on a public blockchain or a private blockchain? And before you answer that question, if you could give a very simplest explanation to our audience members in terms of the difference between the private blockchain and a public blockchain, because that concept itself is very much though it's self-explanatory, but everyone has its own definition.
Yeah. No, I touched upon that point just when I was speaking last, and I can see on the chat messages I've already kicked the hornet's nest, which I was expecting. But I'll start with just explaining what the difference by drawing a simple analogy to the internet. right? The internet is a classic example of a public infrastructure, nothing but a network of computers, but no one person owns that network. No one person has funded it. It is open for anybody to use, and therefore anybody to innovate and build on top of it. So it's not a closed ecosystem, right? Because it's and nobody's governing it. As opposed to which a local area network, right, where I essentially get the computers, the cables, put them all together, and now obviously I own it, I govern it. I control who is able to access it and build on top of it. And therefore, the network is only as good as the person who is building and governing it, as opposed to the internet, which is free to kind of push and pull innovation and being developed over a period of time in an open source fashion. So I think that's really the difference when we talk about a blockchain that is a public blockchain, which is permissionless. It is open for anybody to participate as a node. It is open for anybody to kind of build on top of, and there's no kind of course, subject obviously to the governance that's kind of laid out initially, but that's really the key difference, right? And some of the questions I see on the chat, somebody says that, and rightly so. I think the concern is fair, that will a government ever hand over control to a public blockchain? Why shouldn't government manage infrastructure? Would it not then fall to the Googles and the Microsofts of the world or individual players? But the point is that ultimately, when we speak of again resorting to the internet example, governments do build on top of, you do use the publicly available internet infrastructure. You do use privately built out cloud service providers, etc. Right? So it is obvious that what you build on top of it, the application that you're building on top of it, you will regulate. You will lay down the governance, the contours of what can be or cannot be done and who can access that application. But the underlying infrastructure is independent of that. And obviously you will choose the underlying infrastructure wisely. You will choose something that works for building out a critical application like a CBDC, and with the requisite security features, the requisite control that you would like to have. So obviously you will choose it wisely. But that is not to say that governments don't build on public infrastructure. They do all the time, and that's really the only way. Because if you were to build out your own network, and then you'll take 5 years to build it, and then by that time technology would have moved further ahead as well, right? So you have to constantly, you cannot really keep up with maintaining that private infrastructure very well. So that's my view. I know it's controversial, but very happy to hear pushback from the panelists or other folks. I would love to learn more on this.
I would like to add to Anirudh's point, where Algorand, one of the public blockchains, proof of stake blockchains, is being considered by the EU for their digital euro. Again, it's being considered. It's not a final decision, but again, can be infrastructure can be public or private, depends. If you look at our neighbor Bhutan, is using Ripple for their CBDC project, and since India already has the NIPL, MPCI's international body, already has engagements with Bhutan, then using UPI to do cross-border remittances will be far more easy.
Just to add to that, you brought up a very good point. Different countries are using different blockchain platforms. The ledger IDs will get created on multiple different platforms. Their structure and everything will be different. I think the interoperability between the different blockchain platforms will become critical as we different countries adopt different platforms. And I think that will be one of the key considerations when RBI or even our central bank starts issuing the CBDC or roll out the pilot.
No, that's quite an interesting thing, because when we talk about interoperability of networks and just trying to understand from a layman's perspective that always there are multiple channels for a user to move money from an NEFT to a UPI to a RTGS to even traditional bank transfer, net banking as well. But at the end of the day, all of them are transferred through a single channel of mechanism, which is a single technology layer as well, which is always built on top of regulatory authorities itself. So that said, there is always a major catalyst for innovation, which Mr. Kashinath mentioned earlier. And when we say like digital payments in India, the major catalyst for innovation was COVID-19 and a couple of digital India push by government of India, where people started using UPI payments as a like a major driver to adopting digital payments. So when we talk about like adopting digital currencies, CBDCs, what would be the major catalyst for like adoption of those CBDCs for a retail consumers in emerging markets, especially in India?
This is a very interesting question, and I think the primary incentive for just like when the UPI was introduced in the country, I think adoption of the CBDC is critical, and from that particular perspective, the central bank should encourage what you call cashbacks or rewards in the initial stages. May not be continuous over a period of time, but definitely in the initial period to get more individuals or banks or entities adopting CBDC, you will need to push the cashbacks or rewards for adoption. The other part is that if you look at it, right, what is the purpose of the CBDC? The whole point is bring down the rates much finer. For example, if I'm trying to borrow something, or or today there is a high cost because of the traditional technologies that we use, right? If you bring down that particular cost, it will help the banks as well as the government to pass on that particular more benefits to the retail customers. So that becomes more like an incentive for the, if I'm getting, say today, if the repo rate is 4%, and if the bank is giving me 4% plus 0.75 at a rate which I can get my housing loan, then it is beneficial, right? If the spread becomes more finer because of the use of the technology, because the cost is going down, then I'm able to pass the monetary policy rates benefit to the retail customers. So that's an indirect form of giving a reward to the customers because of the technology. You're bringing down the cost and passing on more benefits to the actual customers. That will actually spill up, because then what will happen is, because I'm spending less on the transactions, right? My transaction cost is going down. I have more disposable income, which I can put it back into the economy, and that itself creates a revolving economy. So my belief is that yes, initially you will require a cashbacks and rewards, but at the same time, the leveraging technology will bring down the cost, and the benefits will get passed down to the retail customers.
That's quite an interesting point which you mentioned, and as we mentioned, I mean, like, there is always those major key apologies everyone.
I think Sumit, you have to
one more guy. There are two or three guys who
mute.
are just trying to create this nuisance, and we are just trying to remove them.
Can you mute them all?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
better.
Yeah. So there were just two guys creating some nuisance, so we just removed them. And apologies. I think it's quite stupid when people try to create nuisance in such a formal session as well. I mean, if people are not interested, they can quietly leave rather than just disturbing the the whole panel out here. But I mean, coming back to the whole topic, I mean, that was a bit of a distraction, but I would like to bring everyone's attention to, once again, when we talk about adopting a digital currency, there is always two aspects to consider. And when I'm talking about not only digital currency, any project, there is always two aspects: the cost and the benefit. So I would like to ask Mr. Sharad out here, if you could just highlight and give a brief perspective around the cost and benefit analysis, like a simple CBA analysis on implementing a digital currency in an emerging market.
Right. So if you look at the cash to GDP ratio of India, it's significantly high, and there are associated costs with respect to managing risks with respect to cash, right? So again, using digital CBDC or a central bank digital currency, at least that cash component and associated cost can be easily brought down. And again, the benefits, they far outweigh the risks associated with digital currency. There's already a lot of talk about how it can act as a surveillance tool for the government to maybe spy on the citizens, right? I mean, the way maybe the China CBDC project is being viewed, and China has got right amount of flack for their own design choices. So to put in perspective, there's a lot of benefit which can be gained out of implementing CBDCs if we can just focus on the cash to GDP ratio of the Indian economy. And despite the benefits of demonetization, cash is again back to square one. We have the same amount of cash circulation in the economy. So that way, demonetization has in fact failed to curb the circulation of cash. But CBDC as another form of money can reduce the dependency on cash, especially with respect to small value transactions. Let's say if you're paying for a utility bill or paying for, let's say, toll, right, or paying for even any mobility kind of transaction, that can be easily done.
No, that's thank you so much for that amazing insight. And I have a like very last specific question for Mr. Anirudh. We always talk about two aspects when it comes to digital currency. It's one being CBDCs and another one being stable coins. So again, it's very much, two of them are very much different things. Like again, if you could just spend a minute to explain, like in your language, how do you try to differentiate them? And do you think that can both of them, like CBDCs and stable coins, can coexist together in a market?
Sure, Sumit. So, see, I mean, if you go back to the origins of Bitcoin, it was originally intended to be a currency, but obviously, you know, the way the cryptocurrency ecosystem is shaped up, and the you know, the interest that we have seen and in the industry, as a result of which the volatility, the price appreciation that you have, obviously many cryptocurrencies don't lend themselves very well for to be used as a currency, right? Because if you want to use money to buy a loaf of bread, you want to be certain that X amount of money will buy me this. But by the time, you know, 2 seconds later, if the value of what currency I hold drops to half, and I can only buy half a loaf of bread, then it's not a good medium of exchange, right? So many cryptocurrencies today, including Bitcoin, do not really lend themselves very well for that use case. And that's where I think that is what led to the emergence of stablecoin, right? Which is that let's conceptualize a cryptocurrency whose value is stable. And it is stable because either it is backed by you know, a real world fiat currency, or it is backed by some other relatively stable commodity like gold, etc. Or it could be a basket of different commodities and currencies, right? But the idea is to keep the value stable so that it can be used as a medium of exchange. Now, we don't only have one stable coin today. There are many stable coins which are backed by different assets, which promise different kind of you know, technological features, etc. And so you have multiple stable coins. At the same time, now you have central banks talking about CBDCs, which the difference is, I mean, again, CBDCs are meant to be used as a currency, so they're similar in that sense from a functionality point of view, but they're different because they're backed by a central authority, right? Which is a central bank, or you know. And so I think that's the difference. Stablecoin is typically, you refer to a private cryptocurrency that is meant to be used as a medium of exchange. CBDCs, you refer to a government-backed or centrally backed medium of exchange. But now, coming to your second question, which is, do both need to coexist? Because many will argue, and I think our own Reserve Bank will also argue that, well, if I'm giving you a CBDC, then why do you need to have a privately issued stablecoin? And I think that is where, you know, the earlier point that I made, which was that currencies of the future will have two components to them: the currency itself and technology, right? And governments should stay out of the latter. So my larger point is that I think both can coexist, because you need a CBDC which is the equivalent of which is the digital currency equivalent of the Indian rupee, and it has its values because the government can use it for, in many beautiful ways, for financial inclusion, for having absolute control over its monetary policy, etc., etc. But stable coins are you know, bring in the technology component, the innovation component. I would like to see privately issued currencies that can create new technological functionalities in a way that I don't imagine my government doing. And both can also coexist to benefit each other, in the sense that one use case that comes to my mind is how stable coins can actually introduce you know, interoperability for various CBDCs. is the Indian rupee, digital rupee, naturally interoperable with, say, the digital yen or a digital dollar? Maybe not, but I could use a stable coin to introduce that. I don't think we even know all the use cases that can emerge from this, right? But that's why I believe in enabling technological environments where one can create and innovate their own, allow them to create multiple variants of stable coins, and I'm sure that that innovation will have its own value.
And I also, I would also add to, like, just as I mean, even if you were looking for the startup ecosystem in India, there are a lot of challenges in terms of getting the funds, right, at an initial level or at a conceptual level. So at that time, if you use stablecoin or, say, for example, non-fungible token, it's anyway backed by blockchain. So obviously, it's secured. It very much not immutable and stuff. So the moment you step in, so you can actually offer that to your potential investor, even potential customers as well. So that means they, right from the ideation stage to that, traction that every investor is talking about in India. If you don't have the traction, we cannot actually invest in you. So you actually solve that issue right from the beginning. Okay, the value of the company or the innovation that I'm doing is X amount, so you can put Y amount, so I can actually give you Z equity, or it can be just ISA. We can do that ISA through ISAP, we can do that through smart contracts. So you have a consensus built, and based on that you can offer that. So that will really solve the challenges that now the founders or the digital entrepreneurs are actually going through. So the government doesn't have to intervene. It just need to secure and give the backing so that the technology, which has already been done and the MVP is built, it's verified by XYZ, authority, and it's available for the open market.
That's very interesting point. And when we talk about stable coins and as you mentioned, like letting open ecosystems come and build on top of the public technology forums. So government of India has anyways been doing that, not exactly when it comes to blockchain, but on other various aspects as well, when it comes to things like account aggregator systems or even like UPI rails as well. They just gave out the UPI rails and let the fintech ecosystem come, adopt it, and then keep on building products and services on top of it. Let the ecosystem come and evolve and come up with various use cases. So I clearly see that, like, even when it comes to like CBDC as well, like government will try to take a similar approach where they just give the ecosystem a direction and a platform to like come and experiment and continuously evolve with various multiple use cases around that. And with that being said, yes, please, Mr. Pravas.
Yeah, I think just one point to add. I think the NIC data should be also open for innovators, so that there are some cross checks and some restrictions in there as well. Who can innovate, who cannot innovate? I think there are a lot of hackathons happening around the country. There are many incubators, accelerators, even private companies, they are doing hackathons. So if we open that NIC data to build something good, obviously if the purpose is good, then definitely the outcome will be good. So if the government can actually think that and open the data, I think there would be a lot of innovation, not only in financial technology, but also for blockchain for good concepts. Like it could be part of the SDG program. It could be part of even providing some of these social entrepreneurs or impact investing and all those things.
That's really interesting, and absolutely, I mean, like, I agree with you. And with that being said, I will specifically point out attention to the panelist on a key aspect which has been like going on the chat window. So I guess nobody tried to highlight the whole potential dangers of programmable money / what could be the potential negative aspects as well. Because when we talk about like digital money, it's always just a technology layer itself built. And today's world is always like physical cash has already been depleting, and like money has been becoming like digital itself. So what could be the potential dangers / negative impacts, and how do we how does emerging markets, emerging governments as well, how do they safeguard themselves from such kind of dangers? Of any of the panelists, feel free to take up these questions.
I think it's important to acknowledge the risks associated with cybersecurity, right? And again, the need to educate people in general about digital currencies or digital payments for that matter. So we have something like NCF, National Council for Financial Education, again, a body set up under RBI, right? So we also need to spread awareness and literacy about digital payments, digital currency. That is one part. Also make them aware about what are the risks associated with frauds, right? So there's a great element of cybersecurity risk, because if you're issuing central bank digital currency, you're also creating a honeypot of data, right, which is open for any hacker out there, right? So it's also important to, and that's where maybe blockchain can come into play with a decentralized architecture and at least take care of DDoS attacks, right? So again, depends upon how the design choices are built and what are some of the privacy controls are being built when it comes to CBDC.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. So I just want to add on, like, you probably seen the status of Facebook, right? Everybody says that Facebook is more powerful than even the US government because of the data they have and also the access of information they have. So you will have two major problems. I think CBDCs are not going to, replace the central government authority or RBI and all these things. It's not actually going to solve the issue of centralization. It will just add on a decentralized layer to it. Second thing, what I'll say is, like, there would be a lot of breach of privacy as well. Like today, if I'm doing any transaction with my bank, so only myself and the bank knows about it. But tomorrow, if I will build something or even CBDCs come in, so there might be a level of consensus required, and that is where we will move from public blockchain to permission blockchain or private blockchain, where your data is also accessible by another 5 or 10 people who are part of your consensus. So that means you cannot actually hide anything. There is a good side of it, bad side of it. But if I am an entrepreneur and I am looking for, always hunting for investors or looking to collaborate, then it's definitely good. But if, as Kashinath sir was saying, it will open doors for criminals, for putting the money for the all these bad activities that is going to happen in the country. Yes, definitely that can happen, because then you have once it is open, then you can do a lot of cross-border transactions and stuff. So people can say, okay, I'm doing good, but they can do actually a lot of terrorism activities, bad activities. But I think once they have the digital ID is created and the KYC is done, I don't think anybody will actually do that. I mean, I've seen a lot of cases, even use cases like people who were part of the London 7/7 bombing, right? Even if it took them for some time, but they got captured just because they used the Oyster card while they are traveling in the railway. So I think now, if you look at, Barclays has done a lot of innovation in terms of financial technology. They have connected their Oyster card with their debit card as well. So instantly, if you have a bank card, you can travel anywhere on the underground, even in buses. You don't need a separate Oyster card. That means it is actually connected. And anytime the central bank wants to connect to the bank and say, okay, who is the criminal or what exactly they are doing, they can actually access your data. They can trace wherever you are. And once you have the digital identity, they can eventually trace your mobile number and get to know where exactly you are. So I think the technology has actually, evolved to that capacity. We can immediately trace the person. We can say who is doing what. It is just kind of little bit education side of it to let the authorities know, okay, this is possible, and bring a technology strategy board along with the financial strategy board, so that both can work together hand in hand. And as Sarath was saying, there would be cybersecurity and there would be all these things. But I think if two consortiums come together and work together, I think we can definitely achieve a better and a greater economy.
Those are like very interesting points, and when we talk about as you already mentioned, bringing about CBDC will always lead to privacy concerns or my data being accessed by other third party. So it has to be always a consent based data sharing mechanism.
Yes.
For any sort of a financial services. And when we talk about consent-based data sharing mechanism, India being one of the major economies, it has moved ahead their open banking ecosystem way far ahead by introducing the account aggregator framework, where like a consent-based data sharing always is required. And as and when consistently, like I think the ecosystem consistently keeps on building products and services, and maybe a couple of even digital banks and neo banks on top of these whole ecosystems. The whole overall idea of a like a blockchain-based digital money will also like drive this whole innovation further 10 steps ahead. And when with that being said, I think I see a lot of like questions on the like chat panel when it comes to specific differences between CBDCs, e-rupee, and like UPI, and how would it play out over, like, and most of us just got used to the UPI, CBDC, and practical solution for India versus the UPI. So if any of the panelists want to take up, and I just want to consistently add, when we are talking about CBDC to other used currency, the value cannot be volatile, right? Otherwise, it cannot be like used as a currency in the first place. So how do we like consistently keep the volatility check for a digital currency, like let's say an e-rupee or a digital based rupee? Blockchain-based rupee. How do we keep the volatility aspect check in place?
Okay, just to answer that particular question, as I said, like, the CBDC is nothing but like, a fiat currency which is issued in the digital form. It will have a one-to-one parity with the underlying currency or the fiat currency. So the value of the CBDC is linked to the value of the rupee. So we call it a e-rupee, we call it CBDC, we call it like e-Lakshmi. We can give hundreds of different names. It's the same thing. It is a different form of the fiat currency issued in a different digital, in a different form. That's it. It's linked. So there is no volatility. If there is a volatility in the rupee with respect to another currency, yes, that will be there. But within the rupee and the actual fiat currency, there won't be any volatility. It is like, it is one and the same. And it is, as I said, it is part of the central bank's liability. So what it means is like, what are the currencies that the government issues, whether in the form of physical printing of the notes or minting of the coins, or issuing the currency in the digital form, we call it CBDC. It is part and parcel of the same overall structure.
That's like very amazingly pointed out, because we as economists, we always ask what's the function of a central bank. I mean, that's the underlying question, and issuing currency is always being it has been the function. And I think this has been an amazing discussion, and a lot of amazing points which we consistently discussed. And with that being said, I am just trying to pick up a few more questions. So like one of the major interesting questions is that like how do you ensure that it doesn't give the central bankers capacity to like subject us to negative rates of interest? So majorly like I think like a lot of panelists, Mr. Kashinath and Pravash and Mr. Sharad already answered such kind of questions in the past, so I'll skip those. So and yes, there has been like already been conversations around permission based blockchain, like as I already mentioned. So I think if there are no any further like questions, like I would like to like circulate with one specific last question to the panelists. That is, any concluding thoughts you have for the panel, and like if you would quickly highlight when do you think that we will see a digital rupee in place, and as a retail user, when do you think that we will be able to start using the digital rupee?
I think we are already.
Yeah.
Sorry, Kashinath sir.
Yeah, go ahead, Prabhu.
Yeah, I think we are already using it. Like if you see, like if you have a Paytm account, even if it's a personal account, but you are already connected to your merchant account, and it's anyway digital account, right? So sorry, digital account, and it's also the digital rupee what you have. If somebody wants to give a payment, they can actually, you can request the funds and they can send you to through the Paytm, and it's a digital rupee anyway. So and then it gets settled on the same day or next day. It's just the process, so that needs to be evolved, and there is maybe a little bit more innovation needs to add on to there, and then we are ready to go. In terms of I think the government is just like we are already there in the UPI ecosystem. I think they should actually open up that to cross-border transactions. I mean, particularly looking at some of the use cases, carrying the money in print format and then exchange that, because that is something is very much stopped right now. And that gives a kind of inflation of what is happening in India in comparison to other countries and stuff. That is where we can actually kind of create a balance of economy there. And second thing is for the private players, I think they can innovate, but that has to somehow connected to the central bank so that it is getting recognized and then after floating it across the country for the use of it. Yeah.
Mr. Kashinath, any concluding thoughts for the panel?
Yeah, I think the right answer will be only RBI can give when they can issue the CBDC in country, when it can be made available to the. Just to add to that particular point, what I want to say is that it's not just about the technology game, right? I'm putting together some servers and creating a CBDC and making it available to the country. It's not like that, right? When you think from the central bank perspective, you have to think from different perspective, whether how I can do the monetary policy rate transmissions, how it is going to impact the economy, how it is going to be the beneficial, how I can prevent push for digital currencies or digital payments within country. All these are different goals of the government as well as the central bank. And when it feels comfortable in terms of addressing those particular concerns which affect the national interest, they will be in a much better position to say, okay, we are rolling out the. I think at this point in time, RBI or other central banks, they are deliberating the impact of there are different pilots. They are looking at the results of those particular pilots, seeing what is the impact, whether it's in terms of the retail introduction of the CBDC or the wholesale introduction of the CBDC. So there are multiple things which are happening, and it is always good to take a watchful step rather than to take a step and falter. So the policy and the approach that RBI, what I believe, is taking a very watchful and careful step, a calibrated moves in terms of how they want to roll out the CBDC. It's not just I take one particular copy and say, okay, this is applicable for me. It's not like that. Second part is you have to look at it that there is a convertibility of the currency from one currency to another, right? When you talk about that in terms of the fiat currency, there are certain restrictions. Say today you can't send beyond $250,000 in a year under the LRS system, right? So those implications, the FEMA implications, so all those things need to be considered and resolved. When they get a comfort level, I believe they will be ready to issue that. So our regulator is at least taking steps in terms of understanding the issues, trying to address those concerns, and then do a calibrated move in terms of the introduction of the CBDC in India. It will take some time, but yes, it is going to happen.
Absolutely, that's really rightly pointed out that there are multiple challenges / issues / pointers / areas to consider even before introducing such kind of a national level, international level project. And it's quite amazing that Indian government has been taking steps to at least trying to identify such kind of steps. Mr. Sharad, if you would like to give any concluding thoughts for the panel.
Right. If you're looking at a timeline for issuance of digital rupee, we are still a couple of years away because there's a lot of legal work which needs to be done. The RBI derives its power from the RBI Act. It has to get some amendments down over there, right, in terms of Coinage Act and the issuance of CBDC on IT Act, on the Data Protection Act, right, the PDP bill, right. So this, and again, if you look at the current scenario where every law is being challenged in the Supreme Court, the IT law is being challenged by some of the legislators in the Supreme Court, right? So there's a lot of legal work which needs to be done, and it's also necessary. You also need the right intermediary guidelines, how the intermediary, let's say, payment networks or payment system operators, what are some of the roles or challenges they will face with issuance of CBDC, the risks of disintermediation of these payment companies, right? Because again, if you're transacting in CBDCs, the transaction cost will be next to zero, right? So how will that play out? So a lot of work needs to be done. And again, Anirudh can come in and help me in terms of the legal aspects with respect to data privacy and other challenges.
I think fully agree with everything that's been said on the panel. It's a number of design choices, not just from a technological standpoint, as Mr. Kashinath said. There are significant implications. There are obviously, the legal amendments that will be required. So we clearly are, several years away. I think if we were to just see how other jurisdictions like China, for example, has been running, multiple pilots and gradually increasing the intensity or the the scope of the pilot itself, right? So I think I think all of that process itself is going to take some time. Obviously, I mean, the one big decision, which is whether you build out your own infrastructure or you don't, will have will make a difference maybe of a couple of years as well. But we're clearly, a few years away. Nothing's happening overnight here.
Right. No, that's like amazing thoughts, all the panelists, and it has been an quite an interesting, quite a diverging points as well that we discussed and debated among ourselves. And I would like to thank you everyone, Mr. Kashinath, Mr. Pravas, Mr. Sharad, Mr. Anirudh, for joining us today. And lastly, I also not to I would also like to thank you all the fintech OI sponsors as well, Open, Perfios, and Sciency, for supporting us in this overall agenda of driving the open innovation ecosystems, open innovation frameworks, fintech focused agendas in India. And slowly and steadily, we will be coming up with a main other sets of programs as well within fintech OI. Currently, we have already launched an India-focused market access program, applications for which are live on our website as well. So if any of the global startups are looking at an India market per se, and they want to explore India market, they want to soft land India market, we'll be closely working with them for a period of 3 to 4 months, help them complete right on time without any delay. And thank you to fintech OI sponsors.
Thank you.
Thanks.